we're all human, just like you said. We can hardly take a bathroom break, much less be like, is this, the ones that require steps X, Y, and Z, or the ones that require steps A, B, and C? And that's how mistakes can happen. And we can end up in a situation like the scope deal. So point just being, like, if we want to do the right thing, but it becomes this difficult, and do we want to take a chance? I mean, especially in the light of the pandemic that we're still muddling through. I mean, we definitely want to do what's safe and make sure that our instruments are clean and disinfected and sterilized. So it becomes difficult if you don't have consistent manufacturer's instructions to be able to do that. If we all put our heads together, we all know what we know about what we know. So I think if we can work together, we can all kind of share our individual expertise and just coming up with stuff that will work and just be easier and allow for the safest patient experience.
Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast RDH and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 298. My name is Andrew.
And this is Michelle, and welcome to the podcast. Glad you're here. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe.
Yeah, we are a dental podcast, and I am here to say that I have beef with another podcast. We have not had beef with another podcast ever.
Oh, and do I know about this?
No, I just thought about it as we were doing the interview.
Okay.
So, and they don't know about this either. And I don't think that they'll ever probably know about this, but let's talk about it for just a quick second. So we just recorded, this is actually one of the first times we just are doing the intro right after we recorded the episode. So it's like, boom. And it was a great episode on IFUs and things like that. It was really fun. Our guest, Kimberly, is from Wisconsin. Right. And first of all, before she even said it, I'm like, I'm hearing Ashley McCauley in here. I'm hearing Lisa Barr in here. I'm hearing all these people that I know, like in her accent. Anyway, so here's the beef. Do you remember that podcast called Smartless? Did we talk about this yet?
No, but I love Smartless.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, so Smartless is three comedians. So Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes, right? Are the three that are in it. So they're all actors, but they're also comedians. And as they're doing the interview with whoever it is, whenever there's a question where it's like, they have to kind of like break the fourth wall or whatever and explain to the audience kind of what's happening, they always say, and for Tracy in Wisconsin, blah, 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 blah. And here's my beef. Wisconsin people are smart. They're some of our favorite people in the whole entire hygiene industry. And freaking Sean Hayes is over there causing a bunch of ruckus. So I'm calling them out.
Well, he's in his defense. Isn't it his sister or something that lives there? I mean, it's a relative.
Doesn't matter.
But I love that podcast will do okay, listener, they only have one person listening
I
to
do like
the entire podcast ever. And it's Tracy in Wisconsin. But we do have a love for Wisconsin hygienists. Seriously.
Don't focus on that part of my comments, though. Can you please focus on this beef? Be a part of this beef with me.
Listen, if there was a chance that they could give a shit about us and there would actually be a beef, I would totally be there for it. But we are a drop in the bucket.
No, I think Jason Bateman probably actually listens to this podcast. I think Will Arnett does not. If anything, he's just over there cracking wise about all of our podcasts.
Jason Bateman, because he's such a germaphobe and weirdo about certain protocols or whatever.
I'm very sure of it. I'm sure that as I'm looking into the stats and looking at all the IP addresses, I've narrowed it down to his location on one of ours. So
not creepy at all, though, Andrew. Not at all.
Well, it's also not true. It's not possible, guys. It's not possible. I jest.
It is not. We can't find you and see if you're a listener. Well, yeah. So I'm glad that you have beef with a major podcast with three famous people. Good for you. I thought I was going to have to go fight somebody, and no, that's just not.
You can.
I'd fall in love with them. I love them so much.
I know. I love them too.
I can't even be mad at them.
But we got beef. We be beefing.
Well, I thought we were going to square up on the aisles of RDH exhibit hall. I thought that was kind of the beef that we were talking about, but
they'll be there. Well, they'll be there, and we're going to throw down, and it's going to be great. Hey, can we talk about the fact that you moved?
Sure.
I I like that long pause because you haven't, but you're gonna by the time this drops.
I was like, wait a second. What? Yes. We can talk about that. At the time of this podcast episode, I will be in New Orleans.
Fantastic.
I know. I'm excited.
How long of a drive?
10 hours.
10 hours.
10.
Okay. So that's not too bad. Now, just to keep the listener updated on how we're going to steal that, updated on your journeys. So you, South Carolina to where you're at now is what, like 7.5 hours, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then 10 hours. Now, are you always going to kind of try and keep it within that 10-hour drive distance?
No. Well, my original thing was to take my little butt on up to Wisconsin. Remember that?
I remember a lot of different scenarios.
I know. This is the joy of being this nomad hygienist. Like I'm telling people, I'm like, this is what I want to do. And like none of it is stuck. Like I am a totally different journey. And it was all a matter of like 3 weeks. I was like, oh, nope. Nobody get comfortable with me coming to their location. I'll let you know when I'm there. And that's when you'll know. I actually did it. Yeah, I'm excited for New Orleans, though. I did get, confirmation that I have power at the place I was renting. I was a little concerned about that because, Ida, boo, Ida. And I'm hoping to go be a part of some of the relief efforts. If I can lend a hand in any way, I'm really excited to be able to go volunteer in those communities. And I don't want to give it away too much because I'm still kind of working out all the details. But if you are in public health, or you're a mobile van, you're a community health center, you do community fairs, reach out to me because I might have some ways to collab that I'm really excited about. So, and you're in that like South Louisiana area. I don't know the distance I could go with the trailer, but me and RBG will be happy to partner with you.
Yeah. Did you put that in all your Instagram stuff that everyone knows, like that follows you, knows that name?
No, I don't think I did. That might be the first time, but you should go follow Roaming Dental Hygienist in addition to A Tale of Two Hygienists so that you can see all the cool things I'm seeing and doing. And also I'm talking a lot about women's safety, or I will starting to be talking about that because, I am a solo traveler and you never know. People are weird. Dangerous.
I can't wait to the first person that you mace or that you use all of your weapons on that you're carrying with you. I would like to see that.
I do hope if that happens, which I hope it never happens.
Oh, no, I mean, for real, I don't want it to happen.
I know, I understand. No, you're definitely not putting that into the world, but I do hope if that happens, like it is caught on camera because somebody is getting maimed.
Well, I mean, you have the security camera, so it's like it's a very good chance that we're going to catch it. So anyway, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and that's the things that I'll talk about on the account too, because I have security cams. Like I went all out. Like it's on the trailer. I have it on my car. I have like SOS set up on my phone and my watch, and I have personal alarms. I have it all. Like my ADD brain, and when it goes into hyper focus, you cannot stop it. And so I hyper focused on security since, the trailer is like everything I own. Half of it is dental supplies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you and your children can attest to that because they have helped me organize my trailer.
Yeah. I think they enjoyed spending time with you. So by the time this episode airs, I will hopefully still be in Mexico.
Can I just tell you that I would like for you to be very, very careful because I know a lot of people that went to Mexico and got caught there with COVID. So be careful.
I will be careful. So, I mean, really now you're going to ruin this whole thing. Cause I was supposed to be like, it's supposed to be a joke where it's supposed to be from Friday to Monday, but the hotel says that if we get COVID, they'll put us up for free.
What?
And so I'm like, well, let's have a vacation down there. We're both vaccinated and we do the mask and all that kind of stuff. And we have to have a test before we get back to the United States. So I feel like we're going to take a test like right when we land. And so that way we're good. We'll be able to get back to the United States. But just in case, I mean, I can be recovering in this all-inclusive resort in Mexico. How great would that be?
Yeah, but the downside to recovering is like you might feel so miserable. You're like, at a beach, son, what?
No taste, no smell, like not be able to enjoy that nice lobster.
How horrible. And also, can I just say, please wear sunscreen, you crazy person?
I have actually gotten a lot better about the sunscreen issue.
Good.
I am probably running about 50-50 now.
Oh, God.
And
That's
also 100% for my children.
Well, good.
Like I'm the person that's making sure I bring it, applying it, making sure it's getting reapplied. Like I'm actually, for whatever weird reason, being like a responsible adult for them.
Good. I'm sure they appreciate it.
I'm still a child for myself. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, this interview was one that I think I had to like, and I'll be real, I'm going to put you on the spot, Andrew. I had to pitch it to you. I was like, don't you want to come on this interview? And he was like, Michelle, like IFUs, instructions for use? No, I don't want to. Like, that's your thing. You do that. And I was like, okay, but let me tell you why you want to come on and listen to it. Because if you are a part of purchasing, if you are a part of using more than a instrument or a handpiece, like at all, like any device, this is going to be a really important conversation because we have to be really smart about it. And we need to make some changes in our industry.
For sure. You did a really good job of like speaking to my values, learning me as a person, and also not making me feel stupid.
It's all that motivational interviewing.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Thanks. I try. The coaching has helped in the MI.
But I'm happy that I did it though. I mean, because it was everything that you said it was going to be and more. So it was great.
Yeah. So I think you guys are going to really, the one listener here is going to really enjoy this episode because it is about instructions for use. But if you are using more than one scaler, more than one instrument in your practice, you need to listen to this episode. And I just want to say thank you to Kimberly. So enjoy this episode with Kimberly Grensavitch.
Before we get to the interview, we want to say a big thank you to Paradise Dental Technologies, or PDT, for supporting the continuing education portion of this podcast for so many years. If you do not know already, many of our full-length episodes count for CE. You'll find the links in the show notes, or you can sign up for our newsletter by going to ataleoftwohygienists.com. When you sign up for the newsletter, we will periodically send out links to shows that have expiring CE courses attached. And none of this could be possible without the support of the amazing people over at PDT. So check out their hygiene and other instruments at pdtdental.com. That's pdtdental.com. Now, on to the interview.
Okay, listeners, I'm really excited for this interview topic. I met Kimberly or listened to Kimberly's OSAP webinar for the annual conference of 2021, and it was all about IFUs, and I was so fascinated by her journey. I'm very interested in IFUs because I am a label reader just by nature of products and food and all the things. I want to know where everything's coming from and what I'm supposed to be doing with it. My favorite, can I just, before we get into this, and Kimberly, I'll give you a minute. Can I tell you my favorite IFU I've ever read?
Please.
It was on a hair straightener and it said, do not use this while sleeping.
Oh, that's
who was the person that made that a rule? That's what I want to know.
I was like, when did this happen where it had to be put into an IFU? And also, I feel like if I could straighten my hair while sleeping, I should not be punished.
And why did that happen in Florida? That's the other question, right?
Yes.
Sorry.
Wow, you just had the entire state of Florida. Sorry.
I'm here now. It's fine.
Yeah, it works. So I'm really into IFUs. And so we're going to have, and if you don't know what IFUs are, they're instructions for use. And we have a ton of them in dentistry. And so I want to welcome Kimberly to the podcast. Hello, welcome. And tell us a little bit about you and your journey.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. I also love IFUs. Just a little bit about myself and my personal journey, I guess. I started in the dental field over 20 years ago. I started as a dental assistant. I went to school for that and then worked as a dental assistant until I was done with dental hygiene school, and actually still even worked as a dental assistant for quite a few years after because I liked it and why not? So I would say around 2015 is when I got into a quality assurance role. Prior to that, I didn't even really know that was a thing. So it was definitely a different journey for me. But getting into it, I kind of realized I don't know why I wasn't always doing it, because it's definitely in my wheelhouse of kind of being OCD and perfection and all things regulatory and compliance. So it was an easy transition. But timing wise, it was quite interesting as far as IFUs go. As soon as I moved into the role, I also kind of assumed the role of infection control coordinator for our group, which is a large accredited dental group. Forward Dental, which is one of our larger groups in Wisconsin, has over 30 practices. And then we also have two other affiliates in Wisconsin, which are specialties. We've got an orthodontic group, Deerwood Orthodontics, and then an oral surgery, endo, and perio group, advanced dental specialists. So infection control is complex because there's a lot of components to it. So it seemed like a good idea to join OSAP, and I've been a member ever since then. So after attending a lot of conferences, which are always amazing and interesting, I started to learn a lot about IFUs. And if you listen to my lecture in June, we kind of started talking about a patient story where a patient had been injured, I guess you would say injured, by a contaminated scope. So he went in to have a scope procedure done on his shoulder and ended up contracting a disease that wasn't able to be treated by antibiotics because of contamination that was in the scope. And his case was one of many. At that time, the FDA started to really look into issues that they were finding with these scopes, that even if the users were following the manufacturer's instructions for reprocessing them, all the contaminants weren't removed. So learning about this was quite interesting. And anyone that was attending OSAP around that time, we started to hear, a lot of information about new reprocessing guidelines that the FDA had released and how that kind of affected us. So continuing on my journey as the infection control coordinator, I started reading IFUs, right? So all kinds of IFUs, you read them all. But I started to notice that there was a lot of differences, and it was really confusing for our teams, especially working for such a large group. We have a lot of equipment. So that kind of just started getting me to wonder. And then around 2018, 2019, I started my graduate program at Loyola University School of Law. And part of my program there, I had to write a thesis on proposed regulatory changes. And that led me down the IFU rabbit hole.
And so what I found so interesting in your presentation was how many differences you found in our day-to-day devices that we use.
Exactly. And even, so one example that I had given, well, not one, several instruments, but I gave examples for one setup. So it was an amalgam setup, I think I did. So, and in that comparison, we compared the IFUs for the cleaning instructions and then sterilization parameters. And we found there was 5 different cleaning solutions out of the just tray full of instruments that we looked at that were required, 4 required methods other than ultrasonic. So it was very confusing just even looking at the cleaning instructions. Like, how would you even manage this? Would you have to have 5 different ultrasonic tanks in your tiny little sterilization area to kind of accommodate all those instructions? And then for the sterilization, we found there were quite a few different times and temperatures required. Most dental offices will kind of have a tendency to use real similar tabletop steam sterilizers. So we looked at IFUs for those and found there was a lot of differences with the instruments that we were fictitiously sterilizing. So it can be really confusing for end users. We also talked about time in contacting manufacturers. So sometimes you'll come across instructions and they're really confusing. And this is even from someone that's got, quite a few years of pretty advanced infection control training. And I even read some of these and I think, what? So you contact the manufacturer and sometimes they're not even knowledgeable, or they'll tell you, oh, well, nobody actually follows those. So
yep.
You think, why do you write them on the box?
Yeah, I know, right?
So can I jump the gun a little bit? I know I'm probably way ahead of this whole conversation, but I can't get off that whole amalgam setup thing, right? So, well, because this is the life that I lived for so many years would be, you have a whole different, you have your amalgam, you have every individual, your amalgam carrier, have all of these things, right? And what ends up happening is you put that whole bunch of things into a basket. And that basket gets put into the ultrasonic solution and you've done your job. So, and again, I know this is way jumping ahead in the conversation. I'm just what's me personally processing those instruments in that way? What is my liability? What am I responsible for at that point compared to the office's responsibility versus the doctor's responsibility? Who's responsible at the end of the day to make sure that is done properly?
Right. And that, as per CDC guidelines, depending on if your state regulates that or not, they do say that we have to follow the manufacturer's instructions. We have to have them readily available. So if we choose to bypass those and kind of do our own thing, we assume the same liability that the manufacturer would. So it would become our issue if there were to be a breach that was a result of us not following those IFUs. So again, to your point, that's pretty normal, right? I mean, we're kind of creatures of habit. It's not likely you're going to know, okay, this, 204 scalar, I have to reprocess at this temperature for this many minutes, but this mirror. So, and even, thinking about us as clinicians too. I mean, can you imagine if, you're a new hygienist and you start at a dental office and you're like, okay, I love these instruments, like even just these two, like I have to have these in my setup, but your office is like, yeah, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to use those two instruments because their IFUs don't match the IFUs.
So what I'm hearing too is that this conflicts with what as temps we do, which in many cases, I'm bringing my instruments. I'm bringing my handpiece or my airflow or my whatever. And we've said that for years. We were like, be your own hygienist, and for good reason, right? Like for good reason, for ergonomics, for just you doing well with the instruments that I practice guided biofilm therapy. Like that's different than, polishing, for good reason, but holy crap.
Yeah, I mean,
we have a problem.
Do you even know what cleaning solution that requires?
I was just going to say, Michelle should bring her own cleaning solution, her old ultrasonic, tabletop ultrasonic.
Listen, that trailer,
U-Haul.
Exactly.
Well, now I have my enclosed trailer that I'm traveling the country with, and that beast is going to become a central sterilization. Apparently.
Yes, you'll have 7 different ultrasonics. Yeah. 4 sterilizers.
Yeah,
we're going to make this happen.
But this is what I also found fascinating with the temperatures and the times. It was minimal amount of degrees in some situations, and for 2 minutes at time difference. And the nuances make my brain hurt. It makes me very upset.
Right. Yeah. So you can even imagine being a manufacturer and you're trying to do your best to follow these guidelines, but there's not really a template, if you will. So as part of the issue with the scopes, there was a law that was passed into place. It wasn't all about scopes. There just was a tiny part about scopes in it, but it's called the 21st Century Cures Act. And so as part of that, because at that time they realized, okay, the scope issue is really bad. A lot of people are being injured because of, these issues. So they did require some parameters to be put in place for scopes. So they kind of made some standardized guidelines for scopes. And so manufacturers before were not required to submit those as part of the FDA approval process that scopes were required to do. But this 21st Century Cure Act required them to do so. But they made these kind of parameters for them. So my thought was, and I know ANSI is working on something like this. If you guys watched Shannon Mills' presentation at the June OSAP annual conference on ANSI-AMI updates, they talked about this as well. And so they are actually working on trying to kind of come up with some standardized guidelines for equipment in dentistry. So
would you be able to break down ANSI and AMI for people that are not just living in the infection control world?
Andrew.
They're regulatory standards for Andrew. Because I know, our utility gloves are AMI standards and regulations. And it's just, if I had to compare it, is it the ISO standards for toothbrush bristles and stuff, but for infection prevention, they just kind of regulate and create standards?
Yeah, so they're called voluntary consensus standards. So they basically make kind of guidelines for different industries. So a lot of them they're not regulated typically, but they're just good practices.
Good. Okay. So, and that's AAMI is AMI and ANSI is ANSI, just if anybody wants to go look.
Yeah. And a lot of them aren't really super specific for dentistry. So that was kind of what they were talking about in June as well. So it was a super interesting lecture.
Yeah. And just to circle back to that amalgam setup situation. And I know we're not getting to the regulation point at this, at this moment, if I am going to start breaking down my setup, like how would you go about auditing your setup? Does that make sense? Do you feel like that's a reasonable question, Andrew? Like if I really wanted to go in there and be like, do I got a problem? And am I going to be liable?
I appreciate you checking in with me and asking if that's a reasonable question. I wish you'd do that more in your life. And yes, that's a reasonable question.
Oh, well, that was just a moment, a lapse of judgment.
It was a huge lapse. Kimberly, I'm sorry. Please answer the question that I approve of.
That you approve of. Well, I mean, you probably could do something similar to what I did for OSAP, where I just kind of made a little chart and kind of just went through and wrote down for that particular setup. There was another one. I think I showed it during OSAP, and this was actually what really launched me down this rabbit hole initially, but I did this with our curing lights.
Whoa.
Because
Andrew's going to love this.
Yeah, this was a really, really fun one. So we had purchased a new curing light, and our group, again, we're really, really large. So a lot of times when we're considering a new piece of equipment, we have a committee that will review it. So, part of what we do is we look at the IFUs. So we get this new light and we look at the IFUs, and I'm kind of like, oh, those are complicated seeming. I mean, it's telling us we have to high level disinfect it and sterilize it and, do all these different things with it. And then we reached out to the manufacturer and they're like, yeah, in our inventory, we have like 3 of the light guides. And I'm like, 3? We have, almost 50 practices using these. And if we have to change them after every patient, sterilize them, we need like 1,000. So I'm exaggerating a little, but they did not have enough that we could have ordered to accomplish this. So then I start thinking, do all of our curing lights work like this? So I pull all of the IFUs, and it was shocking. I mean, everyone was so vastly different. And I'm kind of looking at these going, I mean, I know the output of the light can be quite different. I know that you may use this light for ortho or this one for resins, but I mean, it's a light and it's got a tip on the end of it. And, they kind of all come in contact.
That's how I feel about them too. I'm like, it's a blue light. Don't they all work?
Blue. I mean, it kind of looks like the same. Don't they all have to be processed the same way? So, but no, some of them required a barrier. Some said just a high level disinfect it. Some said they had to be sterilized. So it's kind of all over the place. So again, if you're in a practice where you've got more than one brand, how do you keep that straight? I mean, how long would it take you to do new team member orientation? Like, we're going to have 3 days now to learn how to clean and disinfect our lights.
That's it. That's all we have today. Just secure.
And in conclusion,
know your light. You will be tested on this and docked pay.
I just want to say this episode is going to be problematic already, because once you hear this, you're not going to be able to unhear any of this. And now that people are going to go like, okay, well, I have 3 different kinds of lights in our practice right now, depending on what was on sale that month. I don't know if we're processing these things properly.
And it's so true. That's a good point. Sorry, Kimberly, I didn't mean to step in here. No. But when I talk to people about doing infection control, especially operatory reprocessing, I'm always like, we want to do this systematically. But if your operatory as the hygienist and then the doc and assistant's operatory are vastly different, if they aren't kind of cross-trained in the reprocessing steps of that room, do not enter. Do not come in my room. I don't want you damaging. And I don't have that much equipment that could be damaged, I guess. But don't let me go in your op, because I'm wiping it all down, because that's what I can do in my op, right? But then I'm like, oh, cramp. So disinfectants aren't supposed to go on that scanner. Okay, my bad. That becomes a real problem, especially if you are preaching teamwork. Help each other out. If somebody doesn't have a patient, go in there, you do the thing. I'm like, but I don't know this room. I don't know this equipment. And that's where it's like, oh yeah, you really do have to know every single piece of equipment so that you can be a team member and cross-trained properly.
Exactly. One of my favorite light IFUs too was it said to wipe it down with glutaraldehyde. I was like, say what now? What? So I called the manufacturer.
I don't know why that is so funny. Glutaraldehyde is your cold sterile. We do not wipe things down with glutaraldehyde. PSA. PSA. Yeah. Take anything from this. Do not waste things. Do not
put it under the ventilation hood in your
hazmat
suit.
Oh my gosh. I would have a mild heart attack if I read that.
Yeah. That was a really fun conversation with the manufacturer too, let me tell you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Andrew, how are you feeling about this?
I'm moving on to after chloraldehyde. So, but I am going back to this same stupid setup of amalgam. Man, this is not going to die. Yeah. Okay. So is the right way to then, like when you're considering ordering setups, does it all have to be from the same manufacturer then? And pretty much all of those instruments can be the same? Or is it very like, okay, restorative instruments usually are supposed to be together. So don't they make them out of the same metals and the same like way? Like, how do you figure out what you're supposed to do with there for ordering?
Well, okay. So kind of a two-parted question, right? So I think, yeah, I mean, you would think that they would all be kind of manufactured very similar. So that's where hopefully, you know, our industry can work together and kind of develop some parameters that could be universally applied to like equipment. But if you were right now going to check it all out, yeah, you'd have to kind of sit down with all the IFUs. If you were ordering from scratch, probably wouldn't be the worst idea to order from the same manufacturer or at least manufacturers that utilize similar IFUs so that, or kind of find out what are they testing it on. So maybe at least if you know if they're testing their IFUs on equipment that you utilize, that might be helpful rather than have to go out and buy 3 new sterilizers just to use the skillers that you really want or whatever it is. But yeah, I think if you were starting from ground up, you'd probably have to kind of reassess your inventory so to make sure that you can follow the IFUs.
And then from the temperature setup, like your sterilizer, even then there's a level of training to make sure that everybody knows that, I mean, some sterilizers can be programmed for their a separate cycle. So and please correct me if I'm wrong, but like you don't have to use unwrapped or wrapped or pouches, whatever. Like you could possibly use a different setting and still meet the need of that specific device. But then you'd have to be trained on that and you'd have to know that. And then you'd have to set the time aside to do a different cycle. And we're all hustling. I mean, we're all clinicians that have been like, you're just like, as I always go to the analogy of like, I don't drink water because then it ends up in a bathroom break and I don't got time for either. So like, you know, like this is the life that we live. So like adding that kind of step to it it's not clinically applicable, right?
Exactly. One other thing too, I had talked about, so this was back in, I think it was 2011. So AMI, so by the way, that acronym stands for Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. So AMI and the FDA and a bunch of like healthcare professionals, they actually had a whole conference about this. So, and there was a nurse or an instrument reprocessing specialist too, even from Johns Hopkins. And she talked then about how they reprocess, I mean, we think we have issues. They reprocess over 37,000 different instruments every day. And she said they have like 14,000 different reprocessing instructions. So, and she said that a lot of the steps were unreasonable and it resulted in staff working from hearsay or from memory. So again, I mean, we're all human, just like you said, we can hardly take a bathroom break, much less be like, is this, you know, the ones that require steps X, Y, and Z, or the ones that require steps A, B, and C? And that's how mistakes can happen. And we can end up in a situation like the scope deal. So
there's a lot of arguments around infection prevention and doing the things that OSHA and CDC recommend or require. And the pushback is always like, this doesn't make sense, or this is too it's not cost effective or efficient. Is this costing us too much money? This is too ridiculous. There's too many rules. And even though I will usually push back on those people, there is a little tiny bit of their argument that does deserve to be discussed because of this. Like, you can't have 18 different instruments that are in one setup that then require 5 different ways of processing them. That is never going to work for a small practice, like ever. Anyway, so it's not going to get done. And then we are essentially providing instruments for clinical application, for patient treatment, that will never be able to meet the sterility assurance like levels and things that we should do. And we are then setting each other up for patient infection control breaches.
Exactly.
But is there a chance though that when they're, and forgive the novice over here that doesn't know what he's talking about, but is there a chance that when they're doing the testing to create the IFUs, that maybe all this stuff is still like okay in like the long run, and that they just didn't do all of the 18 different instruments or whatever? I mean, is there a chance that we're still all going to be fine with this? Obviously with the scopes it was not, but
yeah, I mean, I personally think so. I think that again, if there were some parameters set in place, they probably would find that, okay, if you do X, Y, and Z, this instrument's going to be fine. I mean, the designs of our stuff are pretty typically very simple. I mean, our instruments most of the stuff that we use doesn't even require any level of FDA approval or 510K clearance. Most of our stuff just enters the market. So it's not like as unsafe as a scope would be. But I mean, again, point just being like, if we want to do the right thing, but it becomes this difficult, and do we want to take a chance? I mean, especially in the light of the pandemic that we're still muddling through. I mean, we definitely want to do what's safe and make sure that our instruments are clean and disinfected and sterilized. So it becomes difficult if you don't have consistent manufacturer's instructions to be able to do that.
Do you think it's just all arbitrary? Like they're like, oh, sounds like if we sterilize this at 320 or 142 or 172, that'll do a good job.
It makes you wonder, right? I do think there are some companies that really legitimately are following the FDA's reprocessing guidelines. I'm sure you can probably think of a few. A lot of them probably show up at OSAP per se, but a lot of them really do a good job, and I think those tend to be the ones that when I read, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I think what is challenging with some of them, though, is the chemicals. So a lot of them are validating with chemicals that they also manufacture. And so that can be difficult. I think it would be easier if it was like how you see some of them where it might say an enzymatic solution with a neutral pH, something that's a little more general. And
that was kind of where I was thinking also about Andrew's point of like, could we all just be okay? Like from a patient safety perspective, I think maybe we could all be okay, but are we also just ruining our devices because maybe right. We are sterilizing it at a higher temperature than it was what the IFUs are saying? And now that instrument, that expensive instrument, maybe it's a handpiece, maybe it is, whatever it is, like, we already got a problem with our overhead. And
yeah, but here's the thing, Michelle, and this is a you, like, okay, imagine a scenario in which you are the scientist or the engineer that's testing this, and you're running test after test after test, and think about that plot graph that you're doing, and you're like, okay, well, 142 is too much, 139 is not enough. Okay, I gotta have to, and then like you dial it in exactly to this is the perfect way of doing it for this particular instrument, and who cares about everyone else in the world? Don't you want that to be in the IFU? Like, don't you really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think my point is more of like about the practice owners. Like the highest temperature of this setup is 142. So we're just going to do everything at 142 because if the other ones are 137, we're good, right? Like we'll bake that stuff right off. No spores.
Do an extra killing
survive.
At 142.
We're just fine. Being super extra with it. But then let's say, and I'll take something like a scan mate, for instance, that has been tested at, let's say, 130, and we know we get 24 uses, and this is all just throwing numbers out there. It's 24 uses out of it. Well, now we're at 12 because the thing's breaking. Now we have to buy that instrument more frequently. And I'm like, the nerd in me would be like, we need to follow it by 142. But also the ADHD brain of me is like, let's just bake it all at 160. It's fine. And then the person that actually purchases my instrument.
And then the environmentalist in you would be like, yeah, but then we're filling up the landfills and we don't have time to.
Exactly.
Your brain is scary. But Kimberly, are we derailing you too much on this? I feel like you, Michelle, had something really good going, and then I came in and I just like blew this whole thing out of the water.
Well, that's the story of our partnership.
No, but you guys just made me think of another IFU that really irks me. So another one that, and this actually I think is really relevant with COVID, is nitrous scavenging circuits. So something that they kind of talked a lot about during COVID was how potentially there could be germs within the scavenging circuits needing to follow the IFUs. Well, this was already a rabbit hole that our group had kind of fallen down. So we were using I mean, I won't name names, but we were using like a typical scavenging circuit that many people do. We'll just say like the nose part, gets thrown away, right? Well, as we started looking,
have a scent to it.
It could have a scent to it. I mean, I'm just going to throw that out there. So yeah. So we were using these, but we kind of started to take a look. This is, probably a couple years even before the pandemic kind of started. But we were looking at the instructions and it said to submerge and soak the scavenging circuit. So, the whole tubing part that kind of goes from that nose piece down to the actual nitrous unit. And then you were supposed to scrub them using a brush, paying particular attention to the lumens. Now, you guys, I'm assuming you've seen nitrous tubing. It's like, 4 feet long.
Sure. Really accessible.
Yeah. I mean, like,
you can clean the inside of that thing.
Like
it's so easy.
Like the silicone straws that I use, it's so easy.
I mean, we have like 6-foot brushes in our sterilization here. I don't know what you guys are doing, but then you have to remove all the excess moisture. I mean, again, we have like these ShamWows that we just run right down that thing. So, but here's the best part. You can only do that. Oh, then you have to sterilize them, but you can only do it 250 times.
So we just put notches on the hose,
This
right?
is,
yeah, until it breaks the hose. But yeah, nitrous is leaking out the side. So it's fine.
It's fine.
We were thinking about bringing abacuses back.
Yeah.
But then we got concerned if somebody walked past it and bumped them all, and then
Because that would be that'd be fun to mess with. But interesting.
But that's a good point. Something like that has X amount of sterilization. Your utility gloves, I think, is also one that would go into that. Like you can only run them X amount of times. But who's keeping up with that?
But isn't it also weird that it's like a factor of 10? Like, why isn't it like 251? Like, why is everything a factor of 10?
Arbitrary.
And did they really run it 250 times, like multiple times? And they were like, yeah, it's junk. I mean, not 249, but 250.
So my brother and me, a different podcast, they talk about like how we do things in tens because we have 10 fingers and that's how we know how to count. Just anyway. I wasn't sure if that's what the manufacturers count in their fingers as they're creating this thing, but
I mean, you have to like take a lot of team members' shoes and gloves off to like manage the counting of all this.
Exactly.
It's a lot. It's too much to ask.
It's a lot. Yep.
And also like if we were to do a poll, like how many people are actually doing that? Like to your point, like first of all, does anyone actually know about that? But even if they do know about it, how many are actually following through with that?
Exactly.
Because you think I sterilize the outside of this. And honestly, prior to COVID, like respiratory pathogens, I mean, we had bloodborne pathogens, but we weren't talking about a lot of respiratory things. And if we were creating healthcare associated infections via nitrous.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know, right?
That's a good point.
The best part of this story, though, is we ended up switching to a different unit. So it's one that had disposable scavenging circuits, and their instructions were super easy. You pretty much just threw the whole thing away. And there was one part of the circuit that would have to be sterilized like once a week. So we had those for about a year. And then all of a sudden I find out that they changed the IFUs. And guess what? They're like almost the same as the original system that we used. So now we're back to the 250 rule.
Oh, no.
And they're enzymatic solution specific.
So all the things that you love about IFUs that are just adding to the difficulty. What's your process for keeping up with the IFUs and knowing if they change? Because again, if we're all heads down, like in the trenches of patient care, we know people are already just surviving with their infection control programs in a lot of ways. Like now you got to keep up with the IFUs, and if they change them.
Yeah, it's difficult. Our group, we do have kind of an electronic database, I guess, that we keep all of our IFUs in, and we just, do our best to review it. I think it's easier when we have a new product come in because then we can kind of research in advance and make sure that our teams are trained and then kind of just continue to update it. But you just kind of randomly find out sometimes like, oh, hey, we got these new instructions in the box, and, then you got to kind of revisit it and retrain. But it's a lot of work.
A lot of work. Andrew, are you going to start auditing all your instruments?
You bet.
Well, and I'm thinking like my trailer's filled with stuff, and I am pretty good with IFUs, but I was not like keeping a spreadsheet if this handpiece that I use on my airflow will also match with the instruments I use. And then when I put that in a sterilizer that has surgical instruments, because we're all working in the same practice, am I ruining these things that I spent money on? Because of course, when it's my money, it's a problem. Or said the quiet part out loud that a lot of hygienists, they probably know what I'm saying. But it definitely brings me a lot of, nervousness and angst around how am I going to manage this? And if I am temping in all of these practices, what am I going to do with all of my instruments and bringing it into a practice? And am I ruining my instruments?
And what kind of autoclave do they even have? What kind of ultrasonic solution are they even using?
And we saw this a lot with the sharp and free instruments, right, Andrew? Like really in the beginning, like we almost had to like, you remember there was a push to like retrain the industry of like, you're going to have to look at your ultrasonic solution because it was kind of rusting them. And everybody's like, wait, what? What do you mean? I didn't even know it was a thing. And that was kind of the impetus for me going, wait, I have to look at my ultrasonic stuff and like know the pH and what instruments it works with.
I think that the interesting thing is I started using the sharp and free ones after everything had changed. And so they had made whatever improvements that didn't have. But the interesting thing is, this is why having these types of discussions is really important, because when I was talking to somebody else about it in my office, they said, I looked into those things, but this was the problem. Luckily for us, like we knew the manufacturer, so we could just, get on the phone, like, hey, this is the issue that I'm seeing or I'm hearing about. What is the new like recommendations? But if we're not talking about this, if we're not sharing the information that we have, even if it's like, this is one of those ones that I wouldn't even worry about, like the whole rumor mill. It's okay to be like, hey, isn't this going to be a problem for this type of instrument or this type of tubing? I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's how I found out about it though. It was just like, word of mouth. And so I was like, day late, dollar short to that whole thing too.
Kimberly, is there any other aspects of infection or IFUs that would be helpful for people to, or a conversation to have, or to inform our audience that's probably already going, oh crap. Can we just add to it or clean it up, make it easier on them? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think just, read them, especially when you're considering purchasing equipment. Is this something that's feasible for our team? Is this something that we're going to be able to manage, especially if there's lots of parts, if you have to take things apart, and also to make sure that, kind of like you guys were just talking about, you're not going to wreck anything. So if you are going to be getting a new type of X-ray sensor or a new handpiece or, whatever it is, make sure that, the solutions that you are using aren't going to cause damage, because that certainly has happened. I think probably all of us have stories that we could share of equipment damage that we've caused because it's not compatible with, whatever solution that we're using. So I think just do your research, especially before, would be helpful.
And do you have any recommendations on how to help create? I mean, we should all have standard operating procedures around all of these things, but you bring up a good point about the parts of it. So like my Piazon comes apart into 5 tiny little pieces, and I've already lost a part of it because not everybody realized that had these tiny little parts. And how does one create, I guess, more of a systematic approach to our reprocessing of our instruments when you have things like that?
I mean, I think using cassettes and things like that can sometimes help. If they're super tiny, that is really challenging, especially when you've got not a dedicated person that's working in central sterilization. You've got lots of different people milling through. And like you said, we function on teamwork. We're helping each other out. And all of a sudden that one tiny little piece that makes the whole unit work is in the garbage can somewhere. So I think that's probably, unfortunately, pretty normal. I mean, we certainly see a fair amount of loss with stuff like that too. But I think as much as you can have like organizational systems to keep it contained, it's going to be better. Color coding and...
Yeah, or color coding. Yeah. Oh, I love a color method. So much joy to my heart. It's like it gives you the same feeling of like leaving the Container Store and the high that you get from like, I'm about to go organize and be amazing. And you have like all your color method. It feels so good.
Exactly.
So I would love to kind of end the last few minutes with, if you have any suggestions for call to actions as far as like, how can we help get these standards or get this more standardized? How can we help this process, because I know there's so many call to actions in our industry of like, better, license portability and, oral health disparities. We're all trying to fight teledentistry over here. But if this is something that you're like, I like compliance and I like quality assurance and regulations, I'm going to take this on. Like, what would be a call to action for somebody who's like, we got to correct this. This is a problem.
Yeah. So during the ANSI Amy updates in June, they did discuss how they do look for dental representatives for their team. I don't believe that you're a voting member, but they look for input from our industry and helping to develop standards that would be more reasonable or realistic for us, I guess you could say. I think having conversations with manufacturers is really helpful. Sometimes even when you point stuff out, just like us, right? You're like, oh yeah, I didn't even kind of really think about that. So I think having conversations with the manufacturers and with each other, right? Like I think, if we all put our heads together, we all know what we know about what we know. So I think if we can work together, we can all kind of share our individual expertise and just coming up with stuff that will work and just be easier and allow for the safest patient experience.
I like that call to action. Andrew and I talk a lot about like, go to the booth and like, don't be there for the free sample, be there for the conversation, be there for the education, be there for the exchange of knowledge, and not just you getting knowledge from them, but you giving them some knowledge that they might not have that, firsthand knowledge with the application of the product. So I love that call to action, just kind of, and call and harass them. I call people all the time.
Oh, they love it. They love it.
It was such a good, solid statement until you said harass them. And I'm like, come on. Any other word choice?
I do. I just feel like any interaction I have with humans is just me harassing.
Amen. I think we all believe that too. We feel it.
We're hygienists. It's what we do.
Yeah, right. I got questions and I need them answered. So who's ready for them? Like, let's get a coffee, get a glass of wine. I don't know what it is, but let's sit down and I got questions. So I hope that you speak at OSAP. I hope you can give some more updates on this because, like I said, I really did enjoy this. And, I hope you don't take this as insulting, but IFUs could be a dry topic. People might not love like talking about Andrew shaking his head, like the idea of like rigid instructions. But I do think that what you did was bring a beautiful awareness to a real issue that we've kind of just like, we're going through the steps is like normal and it shouldn't be normal.
Exactly. Hey, Andrew, I do have like a 38-page thesis on the topic. I'm happy to send you it to read if you want.
We can just get our editing team to put in some snoring sounds right through this part. That would be phenomenal.
Is there a Cliff Notes version? Where do I find that?
Yeah.
Remember, where everybody's like, 60 seconds to 3 minute
tensions.
Ability to focus. Oh, well, Kimberly, I would love for you to tell everybody where they can find you, if there's any contact information, if they want to reach out, and can they read that thesis? Is it published anywhere?
You can find my thesis. It was published in the Loyola University Chicago Journal of Regulatory Compliance in December 2020.
Awesome. And is there any contact information in case anybody has questions and wants to nerd out about IFUs with you?
I would love to nerd out about IFUs with you. Okay, so you can reach me. I'll give you my shorter email. So it's kgrenrdh@outlook.com.
Awesome. And will you say your full name so I don't embarrass myself trying to say it?
I would love to. It's Kimberly Grensavitch.
Awesome. Well, Kimberly, any final words before we close out this interview?
No, but thanks to anyone that's listening. It means that you're passionate about not only our field, but probably infection control, which is amazing. And I think together we can do a whole lot of good. Keep our patients safe.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Well, another great week, another great episode. We thank you all so much for listening each week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, whatever podcasting app you're using. Also, just a reminder, our guests are so fantastic that they love when you reach out. They love when you interact with them on social media. And you can interact with us on social media as well at Instagram or Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn. You can find us at A Tale of Two Hygienists. You can also go to our website, ataleoftwohygienists.com. And we would love for you to go there and subscribe for our newsletter. We have lots of stuff on our website. We have a learning center. You can search for any episode. This is an easy place for you to find the links for our CE courses and take the test. There's just so much more there. So head over to ataleoftwohygienists.com. And if you want, you can also send us an email. I'm Michelle at ataleoftwohygienists.com. And then there's Andrew, who is Andrew at ataleoftwohygienists.com. And we just want to say thank you so much. If you love this episode and you're loving the podcast, we would love for you to subscribe and leave us a review. And, 5-star, go ahead and do it. 5-star, just hit that 5-star and then leave us a review. We really appreciate it. We love reading them. It fuels our fire. And we just appreciate you guys so much. I think that's it, Andrew. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, y'all.